What if the sausage sitting in your fridge right now is barely even a sausage? What if more than half of that pack you bought this week is water, flour, and something called mechanically recovered fat, dressed up just well enough to look like meat? Before we go any further, if you eat sausages even once a month, tap that like button right now. Not for me, for the next person scrolling past this who's about to buy the wrong pack tomorrow without ever knowing better. Subscribe if you want the truth about what's actually sitting on UK shelves, and send this to whoever does the shopping in your house. They need to see this before their next trip to the supermarket. Here's the part nobody prints on the front of the packet. In the UK, a product can legally be called a pork sausage with as little as 42% pork inside it. That's not a scandal. That's not a loophole somebody snuck through. That's the actual legal floor, written into the rules that govern what can be sold to you as meat. Which means right now, on shelves up and down this country, there are sausages sitting in bright, cheerful packaging, covered in comforting words like traditional farmhouse and butcher's choice, that are by weight more water and starch than they are pig. Think about how that actually plays out in real life. You walk into a supermarket after a long day. You grab the pack your family has always bought, the one with a familiar logo, the one that feels like home. You don't check the back. Why would you? It says pork sausages right there on the front in big, friendly letters. But flip that pack over and the story printed in tiny gray text often tells you something completely different from the story printed in bold letters facing outward. This isn't really about shaming anyone for what ends up in their trolley. Food prices are brutal right now, and plenty of people are simply buying whatever they can afford to feed their family this week. That's not a crime, and nobody watching this should feel judged for it for a second. This is about something much simpler than that. It's about knowing exactly what you're paying for. So the choice sitting in your basket is genuinely yours, and not one that was quietly made for you years ago by a marketing team. They understood exactly which words make a shopper feel safe. So we went and did the digging ourselves. We went through 11 of the most popular fresh pork sausage products sold across the major UK supermarkets right now. We checked exactly what's listed on every single ingredients panel. We traced who really owns each brand once you follow the corporate structure upward past the friendly logo. And we stacked every single one of them against what an honest, properly made pork sausage is actually supposed to look like. Then, because it wouldn't be fair to spend this whole video tearing things down without giving you somewhere better to go, we found the small handful genuinely worth putting in your trolley instead. Before we start the countdown, there's one sausage that deserves a mention on its own because it splits opinion more than almost anything else we found. A sausage sitting at 97% pork with barely 5 ingredients on the entire pack. Salt, a gluten-free flour, a touch of spice, a little sugar, and 1 preservative. On paper, this is about as close to perfect as the numbers get anywhere in a UK supermarket. But in the pan, people either love it completely or find it strangely bland compared to what they grew up eating. If you were raised on a soft, rusk-heavy banger, a nearly pure meat sausage can genuinely taste like a different food entirely. Leaner, plainer, closer to a grilled pork chop than the sausage sitting in your childhood memory. There's no wrong answer here, and we're not going to pretend there is. It's just worth knowing that number exists before you judge everything else on tonight's list against it. Now, to the ones that actually need real scrutiny, at number 11 sits a well-known budget farm-style range from one of the big 4 supermarkets. Coming in at under 50% pork, bulked out heavily with pea flour, reconstituted pork rind, and potato starch. The packaging leans hard on a cozy rustic farm name, complete with rolling green fields printed proudly across the front of the bag. Here's the part that genuinely stings. Years ago, a real working pig farmer discovered that a supermarket had launched a range using a name almost identical to his own. He had spent 2 full decades building up his farm with his own hands. He never supplied them a single sausage. He never agreed to any of it. Customers kept stopping him to ask if he was behind the products. And he had to keep explaining again and again that he wasn't. The backlash grew loud enough that a rival supermarket dropped the fake farm branding trend entirely. Once shoppers said outright that they felt misled by it, the original supermarket kept theirs on the shelf anyway. And in some form, it's still sitting there today, still quietly borrowing warmth from a name it never actually earned. At number 10 sits one of the most recognizable value sausage brands in the entire country, parked right at that legal minimum of 42% pork. This particular name has practically become a national punchline, so we won't dwell on the number itself for very long. What's more interesting is what sits above it. Hidden from view behind the friendly logo, this brand is owned by a company that is itself majority controlled by one of the largest meat processing giants on the planet. Headquartered thousands of miles away from the cozy, generations-old family image, still printed proudly across the front of every pack. The remaining 58% is largely water, wheat filler, added fat, soy protein, and a stabilizer or two, and a red coloring that, across a surprising number of these products, is derived from crushed cochineal insects. Added purely so, the mixture looks pink instead of its natural, unappetizing gray. Number 9 belongs to a heritage brand with genuinely impressive history behind it, tracing all the way back over 2 centuries to a small London butcher's stall that once held an actual royal warrant. That history is real, and it absolutely deserves credit. The sausage itself performs decently too, sitting around 70% pork, noticeably better than several names further down this list. But that historic name now sits inside a modern industrial supply chain owned by a large multinational food group. And the ingredient list still carries all the familiar additions: water, wheat filler, soya protein, and potato starch. A run of stabilizers, and sometimes added coloring on top of all that. A butcher working centuries ago never needed a single one of those things, with a fresh cut of shoulder and belly. What you're buying today carries his name proudly on the front, and a thoroughly modern factory process quietly running the show on the inside. If any of this is already making you rethink what's sitting in your own fridge right now, do one small thing before we carry on. Drop a comment below telling us the brand you personally buy, good or bad. Honestly, no judgment here at all. We're building a real picture of what people actually eat across this country. And your comment genuinely helps shape where we look next. Number 8 is a genuine trap for anyone shopping in a hurry. A major supermarket's value range sells a fresh chilled pack sitting just above 50% pork, and a completely separate frozen pack under a near identical name sitting well below that at around 42%. 2 different recipes, 2 very different meat contents dressed in packaging, similar enough that most shoppers would never notice the switch, unless they stop to compare the 2 side by side under supermarket lighting. The fresh version leans on water, rice flour, chickpea flour, potato fiber, and corn flour to bulk everything out. Nothing illegal here, and nothing hidden that shouldn't legally be listed. Just worth knowing that more than half of what's in that particular pack isn't pork at all. So the saving isn't quite as generous as it first appears once you actually work out how much real meat you're paying for. Number 7 follows almost exactly the same pattern, under a different supermarket's own value label, sitting around 52% pork, made with rice flour, pea starch, potato fiber, and a preservative to keep it shelf stable. What makes this one genuinely worth flagging is that the very same supermarket sells a premium range on the same fixture, sometimes just a few shelves along, sitting comfortably in the low 90s for pork content. Clearly, this company knows exactly how to build a genuinely good sausage when it wants to. This particular pack simply isn't it, whatever warm, reassuring word happens to be printed proudly across the front of the bag. Number 6 comes from a well-known department store food hall famous for its trusted reputation, where the everyday pork sausage line sits at 60%, noticeably lower than most shoppers walking past would probably guess. To be fair, this is one specific everyday product, not the brand's higher tier ranges, which genuinely do sit far higher and which we'll come back to a little later on. But it's a useful reminder that even the more upmarket end of British grocery shopping keeps a budget shelf tucked away somewhere, dressed in exactly the same premium-looking packaging as everything else, sitting proudly around it in the same store. Numbers 5 and 4 both belong to a nearly identical product, sold under nearly identical branding at 2 separate major supermarkets, both sitting around 72% pork, both leaning on a name that suggests an actual butcher personally handpicked the cuts just for you. Water, wheat flour, dextrose, a run of stabilizers, and in one version, a touch of plant extract used purely for color rather than flavor. The overlap here is almost funny once you actually notice it. Nearly identical percentage, nearly identical additive list, just a different logo and a slightly different shade of packaging wrapped around the exact same idea. It raises a genuinely fair question about how many of these reassuring, artisan-sounding sausage names across the industry come from a real butchery tradition, and how many of them are simply phrases that tested well in a boardroom somewhere and then got quietly rolled out to every retailer. Number 3 is a discount supermarket's Irish-style pack, sitting at that same rock-bottom 42%, made with water, wheat flour, wheat starch, and once again that same insect-derived red coloring doing its quiet work. What makes this one genuinely worth noting is that the exact same supermarket also stocks a genuinely excellent sausage elsewhere on its own shelves. One we'll be recommending to you very shortly. Same supermarket, sometimes the very same aisle. 2 completely different products depending entirely on which bag you happen to grab that day. And nothing printed on the front of either one warns you which is which before you get home and open it. Here's something worth sitting with for a moment before we finish the countdown. Almost none of what we've covered so far is actually illegal. Nobody's breaking the law. Every single ingredient is fully declared exactly where it's supposed to be, sitting in the right order, in the right size text, exactly as the rules demand. The entire system works because most of us are busy. Most of us are tired. and most of us trust that a friendly word matches what is inside. That trust is exactly what's being quietly borrowed against, pack after pack, year after year, and almost nobody ever stops to check whether it's actually being repaid. And here's the uncomfortable bit. This isn't only a sausage problem. Once you start reading labels properly on one product, it becomes very hard to stop. The same tricks show up again and again across the entire chilled aisle in burgers and ham and reformed chicken products. Sausages just happen to be one of the easiest places to spot it because the gap between the cheapest and the best sits so wide. Right there on the very same shelf for anyone willing to actually stop and look. Number 2 is a premium range from a well-regarded supermarket, and here's the twist worth knowing. Not every flavor sold under that premium label performs the same way as the others. Certain varieties, once cheese and bacon get added into the mix, actually drop to around 76% pork, made with rice flour, dextrose, and a handful of stabilizers sitting alongside the cheese and bacon itself. Not a disaster by any means, but noticeably lower than other lines sold under that exact same premium name. There's also a separate, more serious issue worth raising honestly. In the past couple of years, the supermarket issued an urgent recall. Small pieces of plastic were discovered inside packs already sitting on shop shelves. The recall was handled quickly and responsibly once the problem was actually found. Contamination issues like this occasionally happen. But when you're already paying a premium price for a range, with the word best printed proudly on the front, you'd hope the quality control matched it. Number 1, and this one earned its spot at the very top for good reason. A well-known frozen budget sausage at 42% pork. Arguably, one of the lowest percentages you'll find anywhere on a UK shelf in any form, fresh or frozen. Made with water, wheat flour, pork rind, a preservative, and stuffed into a beef collagen casing rather than a natural skin. That pork rind, essentially just processed pig skin, does a fair share of the bulking work alongside the wheat flour. Just over a decade ago now, this country discovered that some products labeled as beef weren't actually beef at all. It took laboratory testing, not the label on the box, to expose it. Nobody is suggesting anything on tonight's list is mislabeled. But it's worth asking honestly, what's actually stopping something like that slipping through again quietly? When so much of what ends up inside a sausage casing already depends entirely on us trusting a tiny percentage printed in barely readable text. It's worth remembering, too, that a low number on its own doesn't automatically mean a product is dangerous or unsafe to eat. Every single sausage named tonight fully meets UK food safety law. This isn't a story about anyone breaking rules behind closed doors. It's a story about how wide those rules actually allow the gap to be, and how few of us ever realize just how wide that gap really is, until somebody actually points it out to us directly, in plain, ordinary language, instead of hiding it inside a percentage. Before we get to the good news, quick favor, if you've made it this far, you clearly care about what actually ends up on your plate. So hit subscribe now while it's fresh in your mind, and turn on notifications too, because we've got more of these breakdowns coming. Now for the part you've actually been waiting for. The sausages genuinely worth spending your money on this week. First, a Discount Supermarket's premium value range, sitting at 90% British pork, made with simple, recognizable ingredients, and priced like something from a budget shop rather than a farm shop. This is real proof that a discount retailer can do this. Plenty of people who've switched over say it quietly replaced a far more expensive brand in their weekly shop without any drop in quality. Second, that same department store's higher tier heritage range we mentioned earlier, sitting at 92% pork, with just 6 ingredients listed on the entire pack: pork, water, salt, black pepper, sage, and a natural casing. No rusk, no stabilizers, no added color, nothing hiding behind a chemical name you can't picture in your head or say out loud. This sits at the exact opposite end of the very same brand's range from the 60% everyday line we mentioned earlier. Third, an independent brand built around outdoor-reared British pork, entirely gluten-free, sitting around 90% pork. Consistently described as a genuine household favorite rather than a compromise people settle for when nothing better is available. Fourth, that same Discount Supermarket's specially selected range, sitting at an impressive 97% pork in a natural casing. This particular pack sits right near the very top of the entire list for meat content, comfortably beating out names that cost much more. And here's the detail worth sitting with. This sausage sits on the very same shelves as that 42% Irish-style pack. Fifth, a well-known ethical farming range's free-range sausages, sitting at roughly 97 to 98% pork, made from pigs genuinely born and reared outdoors with proper shelter, not just briefly outside before spending most of their life indoors. Check the percentage printed on the back, not the reassuring word printed on the front. Higher isn't always automatically better. A small, honest amount of traditional rusk in an otherwise decent high-meat sausage can actually help it stay juicy in the pan. One more thing, Genuinely worth knowing before you go. Price isn't always the reliable signal people assume it is either. Several of the worst names on tonight's entire list actually cost more per pack than some of the genuinely excellent ones we just recommended. And if you're lucky enough to still have a proper local butcher near where you live, use them while you still can. Ask exactly what's in their sausages, and you'll get a straight, honest answer on the spot, not a number buried in tiny print. Every single sausage we've talked about tonight is legal. Every single one is technically safe to eat. The small print on the back is where the actual truth has been hiding the entire time, waiting patiently for someone to finally turn the pack over. If this video changed what's going into your trolley this week, hit that like button right now and subscribe for more. Read the label, trust your butcher where you still can, and take back control of what actually ends up on your plate.